Vietnam was a bloody and tragic folly of American foreign policy, a war that feels like the worst mistake our neighbors to the south ever made. Well, maybe not as bad as W's war in Iraq. W. Still, much taxpayer money was spent on fighting in Vietnam. Tens of thousands of lives were lost. War crimes were certainly committed. The country disagreed strongly, and the vicious right-left division we live with now probably started then, or was certainly amplified then. Sure, they were standing up to communism by, to quote Bruce Springsteen, going to kill the yellow man. But no matter your politics, who looks back at this time and thinks good things about that war? Well, that's dark and depressing, but I can change that tone right quick, hard left turn, by trying to do a little business with you. And that business is to sell some Sparkplug coffee. They've got the freshest, fairly traded premium Arabica beans in Canada. Sparkplug delivers to customers in my home country and to people in the United States of America within a week. Canadians don't even have to pay for shipping. Free, free, free. Who doesn't like free? If you prefer decaf or half-calf, they've got those options too. In fact, they have a wealth of blends and roasts, including rotating seasonal blends. So if you're wondering why you're still drinking a brew that made a lot more sense back in the fall or winter, see what works best for you now that the Northern Hemisphere is right in the middle of summer. But you know what? The most sensible thing is to be a member. That gets you perks and deals that some fly-by-night buyer won't get. It also saves you money on every order. You can even customize to get your orders when it suits you, not when it suits Sparkplug. So if you're just not available for a while, for instance, maybe you're over in Asia losing parts of your body while fighting a stupid war, then you can pause your orders. Or just cancel. That respect for your time and budget are big reasons this is not a Coffee of the Month club. So when I say go, you should go to sparkplug.coffee/HYES. That will save 20% off your next order. Tell them Have You Ever Seen sent you on over. And go! All right, it's now time to start talking about... Oh, wait, did you leave? Oh, that was a bad idea. Shouldn't suggest you leave. Anyway, let's talk about the movie. And it is time to start talking about Hal Ashby's Vietnam-era love triangle and action. Have you ever seen Coming Home? Hello, you folky folks, and thank you for opening your ears to the 529th Talkfest here on Have You Ever Seen? We review classic motion pictures on this channel every Monday, and usually every other Friday, and we spoil them as completely as we can. In this case, the we is just a me. I am Ryan Ellis, sitting here alone and rambling into the mic with no one to back me up. My wife Bev is taking off all the holiday Mondays this summer. I don't know about other countries, but today is the civic holiday here in Canada. As I post it, as I record it, it's not. You probably got that. Why do I explain these things to you? So when I talk into the mic on my own, I break down the movie's plot in sequential order, I do the odd impression, often throw in some Simpsons references, very often, and engage in just a bit of tomfoolery. A little bit. Although this one might not get too foolery, considering the subject matter. So let's set it up. Coming Home was released 45 years ago by United Artists on February 15th, 1978. That means I was 4 years old in one day. Now that was the US release date. It took several months to get to Europe and even here in Canada, even though I think generally when Americans can see a new release, so can we. UA's investment was a smart one. They gave the director Hal Ashby about 3 million smackers, and his film ended up raking in nearly 11 times that amount at the box office. Coming Home doesn't have marvelous numbers on Rotten Tomatoes, but they're very good. 86% of critics like it, with an average rating of 7.4 out of 10. There are 28 reviews on the site, 28. The Rotten Tomatoes audiences are almost in line with that. 83% of them dig the flick. The Deer Hunter will come up a few times today, and I can tell you that similarly themed movie has fairly similar tallies, with the same percentage of critics digging it, critics, that Coming Home gets, 86%. But the average is 8.6, and the audience percentage is 91, so they did like Deer Hunter even more. Still, people on the tomatoes feel relatively close to the same way about these two films that are, in many ways, very similar. Planes going by. Recording on a Sunday, might be some other noises going on to distract you. Or distract me, more so than you probably. Coming Home was 15th at the 1978 U.S. box office. Grease was number 1. Superman was number 2. Who is it, Superman? The world is safe again, Superman. Thanks to you. And The Deer Hunter was number 9. We've reviewed each and every one of those motion pictures. In fact, one of those wasn't too long ago, and it was Superman, which I yapped about during a solo show on a Friday at the end of June. Hal Ashby's war veteran film won 3 Oscars. Jane Fonda took home her second prize for Best Actress after having her name called for Clute 7 years earlier. Jon Voight won his first, and so far only, Oscar. Considering his political views and the public stance he's taken on Republican issues, I don't think he's all that likely to get nominated again. Then again, Mel Gibson was back at the show for Hacksaw Ridge not that long ago, and that was after all the things he said and done to offend just about everybody, which outdoes anything Voight has done or said. Anyway, Coming Home won a third Academy Award for its screenplay. Nancy Dowd, Waldo Salt, and Robert C. Jones each got some hardware. The movie was also nominated for Best Picture. Ashby was up for Best Director. Bruce Dern was one of the 5 nominees for Best Supporting Actor. Penelope Milford got to go to the show as a candidate for Best Supporting Actress. And Don Zimmerman's editing was also in the running to win a trophy. And it's interesting that the other beleaguered war veteran movie won most of the big Oscars that this did not. The Deer Hunter took home Best Editing, Best Supporting Actor, Best Director, and Best Picture. The only major trophies that one of these 2 war will fuck you up films didn't win were Adapted Screenplay, which was given to Oliver Stone for his Midnight Express script, and Maggie Smith for her supporting work in California Suite. As for the Oscar speeches, all 3 were quite good, or should I say all 5 people, since 3 of them won for the screenplay. Shirley MacLaine was delighted to announce that Fonda had won. She'd be delighted. She'd be delighted to buy you a drink. Jane does sign language to pay tribute to, as she said, the problems of the handicapped. No one is deaf in Coming Home. That's not any of their problems, but what she did here was still a nice gesture. She mentioned that over 14 million people were deaf way back in early 1979. Wonder how many it is now. So many more people on the planet, so many more people in America. She thanks all the right people, including her kids and Tom Hayden, who was her husband at the time. I've said it before, but Jane Fonda's Oscar speech here, and especially the one she gave when her father won for On Golden Pond, are 2 of the best I've ever heard. He couldn't make the show. He was sick. She spoke for him. It was a great speech. As I recall, even what she said when she won for Clute was pretty good. Voight was in a great category. Warren Beatty, Bob De Niro, and Laurence Olivier were 3 of his competitors. Gary Busey in the Buddy Holly story was no slouch either that year. Okay, not a legend like those guys were, or some of them I guess still are, but a great performance in the Buddy Holly story. But I wonder if this win was at least partly a make-good for John Wayne beating out Jon Voight and Dustin Hoffman in Midnight Cowboy, not to mention for Voight's work in Deliverance and other things too. John hugged Bruce Dern on his way to the stage, then he paid tribute to Olivier specifically, and also to the other 3 guys, although he doesn't call them up by name like he did with Larry O. Voight paid tribute to the key members of the Coming Home team and thanked the veterans. It's a good speech. Voight and Lauren Bacall presented the award for Best Original Screenplay, so John was able to hand over some trophies to people who wrote his movie. Nancy Dowd spoke first, talking about starting the script in 1973. She thanked the people who fought in the war and who shared their experiences with her. Waldo Salt mentioned many veterans, including Ron Kovic, who was the subject of Oliver Stone's great biopic that won some Oscars itself, including a directing Oscar for Stone himself, born on the 4th of July. Apparently, Voight's character Luke was at least based partly on Ron Kovic. Robert Jones thanked Ashby, which got a big hand. Fonda had said in her speech that Ashby wasn't even there that night. I don't know why. He could have been working on being there, maybe? Or maybe he just thought the Oscars were bullshit. Considering the odds were good that he or his collaborators were going to have a good night, and they did, he really should have shown up to be at least part of it, and he won one before, so we can't say he was passed over every time. He won for editing in the heat of the night. I know a lot of people have always thought the Oscars are stupid, but at the very least, the show promotes your movie to tens of millions of people, many of whom might not have seen your film or heard of it before that show. And maybe they now will, and maybe they'll try to see it. Nicholson's opinion's always been that. It helps promote the industry and your movie itself. Coming Home made the American Film Institute's Top 100 Passions. It was 78th. Pretty good selection. It was also nominated for the Top 100 Cheers and both the 1998 and 2007 AFI Top 100 lists. I think it probably should have made the Cheers list. It's pretty inspirational, especially to see a man who's going to have to spend the rest of his life in a wheelchair look forward to the beginnings of a great life, despite having to face life as a paraplegic. When the movie started, he wasn't all that happy when it's over. Well, we'll get to that later on, but he's got a future and he knows it. So those are the bona fides and accolades. And before I start breaking down the story, I should say that I haven't seen this movie in so long that it felt like a first-time viewing. There are very few podcasts on this channel where I had never seen the flick before at all, so it was nice for this to be, I don't know, a simulation of a first-time viewing for me. That was true about She Done Him Wrong and The Way We Were earlier this year, for that matter. I'd seen them before, but not in a very long time, so it felt like new viewings. Okay, Coming Home opens in the year 1968, so it's pretty early on in the war, sometime before people realized just how fucked up the whole thing was. Well, a lot of people knew, I'm sure, but not everybody in the country. Anyway, there's a pool game going on. Pool, yay! As a bunch of men argue about why they even fought in Vietnam at all. Jon Voight is in the scene, but he's laying face down on a cot and just listening, or a gurney, I guess it is, and just listening to them talk. He doesn't say a word. I like that choice. He gets a lot of lines in this picture. Let these guys have their moment at this point, and I think I read that was his idea. Although here's a question. If Voight and the other guys we'll see later in the film are accurate examples of men who had to use canes to wheel themselves around while lying face down in a gurney, in other words, they can't walk anymore, then where are the wheelchairs? Voight will be in one for a lot of the running time of the movie, but why don't he and the other guys already have one? Did the government cheap out, or just do what they always do, at least since World War II, and not prepare for the post-war scenarios of the soldiers having to be in this exact situation? As bad as it is to launch a war of choice in Vietnam or Iraq or anywhere, war of choice, it's almost more scandalous when countries cheap out like this. Pay the soldiers as little as they possibly can, and then leave them twisting in the wind if and when they do come back home. Yeah, it's going to get political, as you probably guessed with me in a war film, government and whatnot. So anyway, contrast to Voight's physical state, our first glimpse of Bruce Dern is him going for a jog. These are the two men Jane Fonda will be romantically involved with in this movie, so it's fitting to cut from one guy we can't see walk anymore to the other guy being very physically active. Oh, and I'm going to do the nutshell very early on this time. It's been at the end of the podcast a lot lately. Right now we'll do it. So coming home in a nutshell, needle drop. There are so many classic songs used in this film. It was Forrest Gump before Forrest Gump, or an Adam Sandler movie before Adam Sandler was old enough to make movies. Anyway, this particular needle drop is the Rolling Stones' You're at a Time. A lot of Stones in this movie. The war over there is heating up. Captain Bob Hyde, Dern, and his buddy Earl talk about how the Tet Offensive just happened. And hey, here's Jane Fonda. She's playing Dern's wife Sally, and she's just sitting there in a bar, only revealed after the guys walk behind her. There's no big entrance for the Janester. She's just there. I'm not complaining that she didn't get some Kramer-esque entrance, glamorously walking through a door or something. And it makes sense. Ashby wasn't the flashiest or biggest director, so why make this scene flashy and big? Cut to the Hyde house, and we've got ourselves a sex scene. Old Bob is seconds away from coming. Just like in Clute, we see Jane Fonda's face in close-up, not the guy who's about to blow his wad. She was indifferent in checking her watch in Clute, but here she is just pretty much nonplussed. She's not bored or upset, but she's not even close to getting off during date night with her husband. Stay tuned, Sally. Your sex life is going to get a lot better. Needle drop. This time it's Hey Jude. First the Stones, now the Beatles. The music budget must have been astronomical for Coming Home. Now, as hard as it must be for the men to ship out and leave their wives behind, it's got to be even tougher for the wives. The guys have a job to do, and they might even have a calling to serve their country, so perhaps they're almost as happy being in the service than they are being at home. Think of the Jeremy Renner character in The Hurt Locker. After all, they've got their buddies to stay in with them, and they feel like they really belong. Later on, Bob will make a point about something like I'm saying right now. But the wives are left at home to put on a brave face and hope they never get that knock on the door. Their husbands going halfway around the world must also seem at least somewhat nonsensical to them, as it does to those of us who've never fought in a war or were close to someone who was. You go all that way, maybe never come back, or you might come back maimed, and all for an abstract, non-clear and present danger type mission. War of choice. It's here that Sally makes nice with Vi Munson, who's played by Penelope Milford. Vi's man shipped out with Bob, so the ladies decide to drink and to bond. Maybe it's the next day, but soon after, we find Sally showing up at Luke's hospital. She's going to volunteer there, and here comes her meet-cute with Luke. By the way, even though I said the man should be in a wheelchair, I do love the way Voight uses those two canes to pull himself along while he's face down on that gurney. The man's got no problems with his arms. Luke bumps into Sally. His piss bag spills, and she, shall we say, gets some on her. Luke freaks right the fuck out and repeatedly bashes one of the canes against the wall. He's mad at the orderlies for not doing their job, plus it has to be humiliating to have your urine bag break open and spill on a pretty woman's leg. Needle drop. Stones again. Well, I didn't write down what song it was. Vi helps Sally move into a house off base now that Bob is off doing the war thing. Back in the hospital, Sally finds Luke strapped down to his bed because of that violent outburst in the hallway. His shirt and beard are stained with food because he refused to be spoon-fed. Oh yeah, and these two did meet cute earlier in their lives because we find out now that they knew each other back in high school. He doesn't seem to remember her at first, but she remembers him. Look at this woman. I think he's lying that he doesn't remember her. Vi visits her brother Bill in the hospital. Robert Carradine plays him. He isn't physically messed up from what he did over in the Far East. It's a mental thing, shell shock. Of course, now we call that PTSD. He's upbeat in this scene, though. Needle drop. One pill makes you larger, and a white rabbit is playing in this movie. Luke, meanwhile, is antagonistic with Sally, insinuating she's just a poser who's taking care of the cripples. His words, not mine. She's working hard, though, and appeals to the other officers' wives that they need to do more for the men in the hospital. But she's ignored. It's like these wives are government officials. Send soldiers over to fight for us, but fuck them when they come back. I like how often the guys do hydrotherapy in this film. Who doesn't like being in a pool, whether it's therapeutic or just for fun? But then, he has a chair. Luke seems like a new man on two wheels, while Sally is a new woman because she has a new hairstyle. I don't think she looks better like this, but she is Jane Fonda, so it's absolutely impossible for her to look bad. Needle drop. Jumpin' Jack Flash, it's a gas. Chris and I covered Murderball on Scoring at the Movies several years ago, my other podcast that's not active anymore. But here's a nice precursor to that sport as the guys play not wheelchair rugby, but wheelchair football. Some old fogey rambles on about what July 4th means to him, so I guess this day is supposed to take place on, hold on, let me check. Calendar. Oh, the 4th of July. And by the way, I'm recording this while on vacation right at the end of July, and it feels like another summer has gotten away from me. At least we still have August. Anyway, Billy Boy's at the party too, and he plays guitar joyfully for a few minutes, until he breaks down and is comforted very sweetly by Luke. It's even nicer that the two women just watch. They don't try to play mother hen to Bill. They just let the guys have their moment. So time passes and Sally takes Luke home for dinner. She may be married and he may be in a chair, but a connection is a connection. Plus they have all that history by being classmates in high school. Luke even confesses to her that he spends 95% of his time in the hospital thinking about making love to Bender. That's Sally's maiden name. He's always calling her Bender in this movie. But she comes back fast with, I've never been unfaithful to my husband. So I guess that pours ice water on that particular crotch fire. Sally takes Luke back to the hospital, where he gives her first wheelchair ride. I love the intimacy of something like this. It isn't sexual, but she is sitting in his lap. Although it does get a little sexual because they kiss, but it doesn't go any further than that. They're making us wait. As Dustin Hoffman said in Wag the Dog, you gotta tease him. We are going to get something hot between these two, just not yet. Bob sends a letter to Sally telling her that he and Vi's man Dink are getting some R&R. Dink. He asks her and Vi to join them in Hong Kong. Needle drop. Boom, doom, 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 doom. My girl, my girl, my girl. Not too subtle with that choice of tune, although she really is my girl for two different guys. Or will be. Hanoi Jane does indeed fly over to Southeast Asia and finds her husband being rickshawed around like a big shot. I've always assumed when I see people in rickshaws here in Toronto that they're swimming in money. It seems like an expensive way to get around. Probably isn't, but it seems like it is to me. Anyway, this is a happy reunion for about 2 seconds of screen time until Bob finds out that Sally is volunteering at the hospital. He's pissed because he doesn't want her to have to work. But of course he doesn't even realize what he should be bothered about is that she's met a special fella while working. Needle drop. Goodbye, Ruby Tuesday. Which in my notes says goodbye. Goodbye, Ruby Tuesday. That's one of my 2 or 3 favorite Stone songs, actually. I love Ruby Tuesday. Luke seems to be settling into his post-hospital life while Sally continues to rest and relax with Bob and Dink in the Hong Kong. Vi is there, right? I didn't write down Vi being there, but I think she went with her. Saw the movie a week ago. I don't remember now. Luke has some fun in the grocery store as he plays around with some kids who are, well, just being typical kids. Honest enough to say that they don't believe he needs to be in that chair. And he has some fun with that. He's not mad at them. Needle drop. Please allow me to introduce myself. The song is Sympathy for the Devil, which just might be the most used song in movie soundtrack history. It is in so many films. While Bob struggles with what he's seen in combat and is soothed by Sally the healer, Luke has a professional lady over to have some fun with him. He interrupts his paid-for date to talk to Bill on the phone, though. The sex worker gets her money, but Luke has badder fish to fry at the hospital. And he's right to be worried because Bill injects air directly into his veins before Luke can get there to try to talk him down. You always see nurses in movies tap air bubbles out of needles. This is why. Bill's brain pain is over, though. Poor kid. Sally comes home from the Far East to find out what happened. As she so often is in this movie, Jane Fonda is in the soothing position, sitting behind the grieving Vi. Needle drop. Born to be wild. Which was a key song in Easy Rider, the huge indie hit that Jane's brother Peter made with Dennis Hopper. While the ladies go out and try to have a good time, with Vi revealing that Dink has proposed, I guess by letter? Unless she was there with her in Hong Kong and he did it there. I don't know. Luke closes the gates and chains himself to the front of a recruitment center. No more enlisting for you, motherfuckers. Luke was anti-war when we met him, but now he's going all in. It's a sit-in. Hal Ashby was an editor, and he knew as well as any director how to show contrasts. Case in point, while Luke is doing all this, Vi and Sally go to the hotel room of a couple of skeezy dudes. Vi needs to just have fun and probably do something reckless. I'm sure the only reason Sally is there to watch over her friend, not to end her faithfulness streak with one of these guys. Vi starts to do a striptease, but breaks down in tears, so the ladies leave. Vi and Sally see the news report about how Luke's protest didn't last long and his chain was cut by the proper officials. Sally bails him out of prison, or at least she picks him up there. I assume she bailed him out, and they head home for some good lovin'. This is a perfect example of nudity being used on screen as vulnerability, not sexuality. Bev and I talk about this a lot. She's fully dressed, but he's naked in his chair. Then Ashby cuts to them both being naked and doing it. I built it up before, but now that we're here, I can say that this sex scene is hot as hell, especially when he gives her oral and she has the kind of orgasm that she certainly wasn't having with Bob. Any orgasm, probably. Plus, Jane Fonda doing nudity wasn't exactly a common thing in the 70s. Still, though, this is more sweet and hopeful than it is lusty. It's also fascinating to see a woman getting oral and then having an orgasm. It's never been common to show something like that in movies or to show an able-bodied person doing it with a disabled person. There was no NC-17 rating in 1978, although movies that have women coming via oral have been given an NC-17 in the years since this film came out. Considering the prudishness of Hollywood, especially as it relates to women getting off, I'm surprised Coming Home didn't get an X. Oh, and one more point about this scene. I read in the trivia that Fonda had a body double, but didn't we see at least one of her nipples in the same shot as her face? I watched the movie close to a week ago, like I said a minute ago, and I only read that body double trivia entry a few days ago, but I thought for sure we did see evidence of Janie showing it off. Bev watched the movie with me, and I seem to remember us commenting on exactly that we weren't expecting Fonda to show skin. Not that she never did, but I don't think it was common at this point in her career when she was around 40. Needle drop. Strawberry fields forever. We get a montage of good times with Luke and Sally, her riding a bike and him in his chair. They watch a slideshow of his Vietnam experiences, which might be the first time he's ever shared these slides or these stories with anyone. While walking and wheeling on the beach and discussing what will happen when Bob comes home, Fonda hugs Voight from behind in a way that made my heart skip a beat. Marriage or not, this is the man she should be with. Bob sends a letter to Sally to say he was shot in the leg and is indeed coming home. Needle drop. For what it's worth, there's something happening here, but what it is ain't exactly clear song, which is in Forrest Gump, by the way. Bob limps off the plane amongst a field of flag-draped coffins, and we learn quickly that no matter what happened to Bob over there, he isn't the anti-war activist that Luke became. When some protesting flower children chant, 1, 2, 3, 4, we don't want your rotten war, they say rotten. I think it's supposed to be fucking, right? Isn't that the chant? 1, 2, 3, 4, we don't want your fucking war? Well, anyway, Bob flashes the peace sign at them and then quickly turns it into the bird. He tries to put on a I just want to drink and have fun tonight attitude while Vi and Sally entertain him, but Dern does a good job of playing quiet desperation and lying about why he got wounded. Self-infliction much, sir? Oh, there was another needle drop in here. Time Has Come Today by the Chambers Brothers. Bob goes out drinking with his war buddies, including a young Jonathan Banks. They all come back home blitzed. This is not what Sally bargained for, and hell, she didn't really want Bob to come back from the Nam all that much anyway. It's a startling moment when she finds Bob asleep in bed with a gun in his hand. The FBI calls Bob in for a conference and then reveals Sally and Luke's affair to him, because that was a matter of national security, and it was worth the man-hours it took to reveal it. Although the reason they were tailing Luke was the incident at the recruitment center gate. Still, though, meddling in not just his personal life, but Sally's, too, seems like a bridge too far. Stay the fuck out of it. Bob confronts Luke with the info, but doesn't actually seem all that mad about them having an affair. He quietly leaves, claiming, the rest is up to Sally. Maybe Bob thought it would be unbecoming for a soldier to pop a guy who's wheelchair-bound, even if the other guy is also a veteran, and that veteran is bopping the man's wife. Although maybe it's not up to Sally because Bob loads up a rifle with a bayonet on it. Sally tries to talk him down, saying she loves him. She doesn't try to make excuses for fucking around with Luke. Who shows up? This isn't going to be any more complicated than it already is, quoting Luke directly here. But good God, you really are making this worse, Lucas. The man has a boomstick with a fucking knife attached to it. You boned his lady. I know you want to play peacemaker and you're worried about her safety, but this is throwing a bunch of gasoline on a Quebec forest fire. Voight and Fonda really do play it cool in this scene. Underplay it, I would say, really, considering Dern is nutso and has a loaded weapon. What's doubly sad is that I doubt this behavior is that uncommon for actual war veterans who are dealing with PTSD. Bob says to Sally that he wants to be a hero, so that it's something he had done, something that was his. Luke gets a hold of the rifle, unloads it, and removes the bayonet, then leaves the hides alone to figure out their shit. Voight's last big scene in the movie is to talk to a bunch of high school kids, which is cross-cut with Dern stripping off his Marine uniform on the very day he was given a medal for bravery, mind you, and doing the A Star Is Born thing in the surf. In most versions of A Star Is Born, Norman Maine drowns himself to save his wife the pain of being his wife, and to end his own anguish, of course. Now it's Dernsey doing it and coming home. We don't get confirmation that he drowned, but obviously poetically we're saying he's going to drown himself. Meanwhile, Luke is telling the students that he doesn't feel good about killing for his country because there's not enough reason to kill or die for a lousy thing, as he says. And if you want to win an Oscar, you usually need to die or to cry. And Voight does a little bit of crying here, just choking up a little, but it counts. Apparently Voight improvised this speech, but I also read years ago that Don Zimmerman, and maybe Ashby himself, since he started his career as an editor, shaped that performance in post, and it's a huge reason some people think Voight won Best Actor. I think I write about all that in the book I've mentioned countless times on this channel, Easy Riders, Raging Bulls, and if Peter Biskind is implying that it speaks badly of Voight that he needed that kind of help in post-production, well, shaping a performance is the editor's job, plus Jon was good in this entire film, not just in this last bit at the end. He was worthy of the Oscar, come on. And speaking of the end, I guess all's well for Sally. She didn't seem to love Bob even before he went over to the nom. The way he was acting since he got back, not good. So his suicide frees her up to be with the man she really loves. I don't mean to be flippant. It's a sad ending, obviously, and I'm not glad that Bob killed himself. It's interesting that Ashby's next flick, Being There, ended in water as well. Or rather, it ended with Peter Sellers walking on water. Oh, and one last plot point before I get to the cast is that I found it striking that we pretty much never see combat footage in Coming Home. It's a war movie with almost no war in it. Much like The Best Years of Our Lives was. Another connection, The Deer Hunter, that movie, this one. The topic was war, but the story was love. So the cast. Jane Fonda has been featured on this channel occasionally over the years, although probably not often enough. She's as good an actress as there is, especially when she was turning 40 here in the late 70s. I reviewed Cat Ballou back in April during Revenge Month, a movie that came out when she was still quite young, and wow, was she gorgeous. Not that she isn't here. Bev and I also jibber-jabbed about the China Syndrome and On Golden Pond several years ago, films that were made exactly in this era. Jay Fonds was excellent in both of those. She started working less as the 80s rolled on, then took 15 years off from 1990 to 2005 to watch Atlanta Braves baseball games with Ted Turner, her husband then, of course. She's been pretty prolific in more recent years, both on TV screens and on movie screens, though. She's been in 3 movies this year alone. And of course, she's always been very political and supports underdog causes. She gets arrested almost as often as Donald Trump, only for far more noble reasons than why he gets in trouble. And Fonda tended to, before and still now, put her money where her mouth is and was, a lot more than other celebrities did or do, especially back in the 70s and into the 80s. She had money and she used it to get movies made. On Golden Pond was her project, and I believe The China Syndrome was too. And Coming Home certainly was. On Golden Pond was a play, I think, but okay, she shepherded it to the big screen, let's put it that way. I think I read that, and we talked about that back then years ago. Considering how some people called her Hanoi Jane after she was photographed chumming around with the North Vietnamese in 1972, it makes sense that someone who gave a shit about what was happening to all people in Vietnam would want to make a film that honors the veterans and their struggles. And I think that's what she was trying to do when she was with those people, was to care about everybody, not just Americans and the South Vietnamese. People overuse the phrase national treasure about our actors, but this woman is so much more than just a thespian, so she earns that national treasure moniker more than almost anyone else ever has. Martin Sheen belongs in that conversation too, for some of the same reasons. Now, Jon Voight is Fonda's political 180, at least he is now. Maybe he wasn't so much 45 years ago. But Jon's had a legendary career too. He was a Midnight Cowboy in Deliverance. He also played Adolph Rupp in Glory Road and Howard Cosell in Ali, so real people he's playing there. All of those films have been talked about either on this podcast or on Scoring at the Movies, my defunct sports movie podcast. And we haven't reviewed these, but he was also in huge titles in the mid-90s like Heat and Mission Impossible. I'm also a very big fan of Enemy of the State, where he plays an excellent villain. One last thing about Voight, I always found it interesting that he and Al Pacino both in the 70s sounded so different than they have in the last probably 30 years. Maybe it's smoking. I'm pretty sure with Pacino it's smoking, but he went from the voice he has in The Godfather, and Serpico, and so on, to the, oh yeah, guy he's been for at least 30 years. And Voight is very similar. High-pitched voice in Deliverance, Midnight Cowboy, all those movies. But then you think of him in Enemy of the State and Heat and so on, and he's got that deep, gravelly voice. Bruce Dern is now 87, and he's still working. He got his second Oscar nomination 35 years after this one. That was in the lead actor category, and it was for Nebraska. Bev and I did what we called a Now Playing Project podcast about that film back in 2013. We had just seen the film and did a context-free review of the picture that night, so fresh out of the theater, let's talk about it right now. Dernsey was also in Django Unchained and The Hateful Eight for Tarantino, plus Monster for Patty Jenkins. So what's that, 4 titles now on this channel? Oh, but a truly heartwarming movie I suggest you seek out, and one that Chris and I reviewed on Scoring at the Movies, is The Peanut Butter Falcon. The Dernster is barely in it, but he's pretty good in his few scenes in The Peanut Butter Falcon. As I'm sure you know, Jane Fonda is the daughter of an ultra-famous actor, while Dern and Voight are both fathers of actresses who are, well, probably more famous than they are. Laura Dern has been acting forever, and she won an Oscar for Marriage Story just a few years ago. Angelina Jolie is Voight's on-again, off-again estranged daughter, and she's also an Oscar winner. As for Jane Fonda, of course, Henry's her dad, Peter's her brother, and Bridget is her niece, Peter's daughter. I guess people might call her a nepo baby, or even Peter, or Bridget. But I think that Nepo baby crap is exactly that a lot of the time. A crock of shit. A crock of crap. Everyone I just talked about is extremely talented. Yeah, they probably got a leg up because of their parents being famous actors, but look how good or even great they've all turned out to be. Freddie Prinze Jr. Now there's a Nepo baby. Or Jaden Smith. Nepo baby. Anyway, that stupid expression needs to die. Penelope Milford is in this cast too. She showed up in Heathers later on, which is one of the most popular podcasts on our channel. Podcasts. She was only in about 20 flicks, and even though she's still alive, she hasn't been in a film in more than 25 years. When I looked up Robert Carradine on the IMDb, the first credit it is known for is the one that always comes to my mind first with him, Revenge of the Nerds. That might be a bad movie, but I loved it as a kid, and I've seen it in recent years, and I still enjoyed it. And Robert comes from Hollywood royalty himself. His brother is Keith Carradine, his half-brother is David Carradine, the Kill Bill guy, Bill and Kill Bill. And his dad is John Carradine, the guy who played Casey in The Grapes of Wrath and, 1,000 other characters probably. As for Robert, he was also in Django with Bruce Dern. He had a cameo in The Player, which we covered last year, and he was in many Revenge of the Nerds sequels, but not Anthony Edwards, who plays his buddy in the first one. I paid my dues, time after time. The director, Hal Ashby, was at the helm of Harold and Maude, which we reviewed a couple of years ago. Hal directed 7 pictures in the 70s, among them The Last Detail, Shampoo, and Being There. His films were Oscar magnets, and many movie stars did some of the best work of their entire career working with him, from Jack Nicholson to Julie Christie to Peter Sellers. But as I've been saying here, his career did not start as a director. He edited several Norman Jewison flicks in the 60s, and he won that Oscar for cutting In the Heat of the Night. And guess what? We've covered that too. The Easy Riders Raging Bulls book I talked about starts to focus on Ashby as it winds down the last few chapters. Biskin sympathizes with the way Ashby's career flamed out, partly because Hollywood left him behind, although Hal didn't help his own cause. It sounds like he was quite a weirdo flake, who even alienated some of the people working for him and with him, not just Hollywood executives. Contrast to some of those great actors he worked with, like Fonda, Nicholson, and Warren Beatty, he wasn't very good at playing the game. But scroll through his credits. The man was making movies as good as anybody in the 70s, and he shouldn't be forgotten. Nancy Dow was coming off of writing Slapshot the year before. Then she was uncredited on North Dallas 40's writing team the year after this. Chris and I covered both of those sports films on Scoring at the Movies. Dowd got the Oscar, but she only got story credit on this. Coming Home was the last writing credit Waldo Salt ever had. He won a trophy for this, of course, but he also got one working with Voight and producer Jerry Hellman on Midnight Cowboy. So another controversial film for Hellman, Salt, and Voight. Salt wrote Serpico with Norman Wexler, and Wally was even involved in the Philadelphia story way back in 1940. We've covered all the movies I just mentioned in the last minute or so, or a few seconds. The man was blacklisted during the Red Scare nonsense in the 50s, and he was in his mid-60s when this movie came out, so maybe he just had enough and wanted to retire and enjoy his life, which ended in 1987 when he died of lung cancer. Robert C. Jones only ever got writing credit on this and Being There. He was mostly an editor. The man cut Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. We reviewed that. And he was also in The Suite for Days of Thunder and The Babe, 2 sports flicks that you can find on Scoring at the Movies. He was the editor on a few Ashby pictures too, The Last Detail, Shampoo, and Bound for Glory. Haskell Wexler is behind the camera. He was involved in many legendary projects, but was also, from what I've read, hard for some directors to work with. He did his usually terrific job lighting Coming Home, though, and I didn't read that he and Ashby butted heads. Jerry Hellman was the producer. He did that only 7 times, including on Midnight Cowboy. His last flick turned out to be The Mosquito Coast, even though he lived for another 35 years. I don't know if he and Salt did in fact retire, but I hope so. You don't have to make movies until you drop dead on the set. Spend your money, see the world, relax, be with friends, be with family, and bask in the great things you did do. So I don't know if they retired. I hope they did. Okay, so I think I made it clear that I liked Coming Home and really respect what it stands for. A lot of civilians were angry with soldiers for what they did in the NAM and protested them at the airport when they came home. But I tend to be sympathetic to what they go through. Yes, the Sean Penn character in Casualties of War and the Tom Berenger character in Platoon are vicious bastards, but even they have reasons to be at least somewhat the way they are. Watch those movies through those eyes and you gotta agree, these guys are terrible, but it's not completely unmotivated. Unless you've been in a war, you can never understand what they went through. I haven't been anywhere near a war myself, so I can't relate, but I at least can understand that I can't relate. As far as the performances in this film, all of them are terrific. Voight was about as good in this as he was in anything he made. Dern makes the most of fairly limited screen time, typically intense, like he always is. Still working, like I said. And Jane Fonda is simply one of my favorite actresses, especially around this time, the 70s and 80s. Maybe not so much now that she's making stuff like Book Club and 80 for Brady, stuff that doesn't challenge her at all. Hell, Bev and I ragged on the newsroom when we covered Milk because Alison Pill was in that show, and she's awful in it, which is probably Sorkin's fault, writing her that way. But it's not like Jane Fonda was good in the newsroom either. Are we here to talk about blah, 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 or are we here to fuck around? Talk about being campy. In fact, for someone so talented, I'd say she's quite terrible and way over the top in that. But generally, she's great. This is a fine movie, one that maybe everyone should be obliged to see at some point. Apart from some references and expressions that make people cringe now, a lot of what's in here isn't very dated. If anything, what soldiers deal with in modern warfare and the brutal weapons used on them, and certainly by them, is even worse than what happened to the guys who duked it out in Southeast Asia in the 60s and 70s. So that was Coming Home. Next week, Bev will be back across the table from me and we'll be covering a film we've covered before. I talked earlier about Nebraska being part of the Now Playing project. Well, we came home after seeing The Wolf of Wall Street on the big screen a decade ago and recorded a brief podcast about it too. So let's see what we think of Marty's 3-hour bacchanal now that we have 10 years of context. Programming note, I won't be posting a show on Friday. I'm just taking some time off, since I'm on vacation right now, and a fellow can't enjoy his staycation quite as much as he wants to if he's constantly thinking about podcasting. So my next solo show will be on August 25th when I review... I'm not entirely sure. Probably Pick Up on South Street. I don't think there's ever been a Richard Widmark or Sam Fuller flick on this channel, so that seems like a cool place to start, you stinkers. I might change that up, but probably Pick Up on South Street on the 25th. You can make your voice heard by emailing or tweeting us. HaveYouEverSeenPodcast@gmail.com is our email, and @MovieFiend51 and @BevEllisEllis are our Twitter handles. You can also comment on our YouTube page. Fire up your browser and type in @HYESEllis, or look up Have You Ever Seen when you're searching for things on the tube. You'll see each and every one of the episodes we've posted there since the year started. And why not subscribe, like, follow, and share? And one last thing, Sparkplug Coffee. They're our sponsor, and you Canadians and our friendly neighborhood Americans can take advantage of our HYES promo code. That will snag you a 20% discount. Go to sparkplug.coffee/HYES. Okay then, thanks so much for listening to me today. Talk to you again on the 14th. I'm going to do what Jon Voight did in Coming Home now and spend the next 7 days fantasizing about the total package that is Jane Fonda. Oh, and to all the real war veterans, thank you for your service. And cut.